Um, I think first and foremost, how's business going? How are things going for you guys? And what are you seeing in the market and so forth out there?
It's good, yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah, fortunately, we're having a really good year. We ended H1 well ahead of our goals, or at least pacing towards our goals for the year, which is great. Yeah, I mean we've seen, at least as it relates to our business, training sales teams, B2B tech. We seem to be in this very Goldilocks type of environment where post 2023 recession, 2023 comes around. Silicon Valley Bank collapses. These tech companies, they make big cuts and they say, we can't really invest in trading, at least to the extent that they used to. And then early 2024 comes around and it's like, crap, we need to at least provide a little bit of training support for our teams. But we don't want to turn the dial all the way to 11 and hire these, really well built out enablement teams of, 10, 12, 20 people for a 500-person organization like they used to. That environment is the perfect environment for sales assembly, right? Companies that believe in skill development, but at the same time, they are operating under much more restrictive financial conditions than they were 3 years ago, as is pretty much any B2B tech company right now.
Let's take a step back and why don't you introduce, one, your background and why you got into sales assembly, but then also sales assembly in general. So you obviously saw a problem here and why did you guys go and build it and why did you, what did you find along the way or were there any pivots, strong pivots that you made? But maybe let's start with like what sales assembly and you and how you got involved.
Yeah, so Sales Assembly, my partner Jeff and I launched this back in 2017. And the story of how Sales Assembly came to be, how we evolved to where we are today, 8 years later, and taking a step back, just my career in general is a series of like Forrest Gump type of incidents, right? I started in finance, wealth management, which is essentially sales, because you're going around, you're selling yourself. After a little more than a decade in that, I got involved raising money for early stage companies. Met the CEO of a Series A company here in Chicago. Long story short, joined their team to help build sales teams across the country. The first person who I hired was my now business partner, Jeff, that I'd met serving on the board of the same charity a few years prior. And because we were both relatively new to tech sales, one of the things that we did at the time is we built a really informal monthly coffee get together of the heads of sales of what at the time were other early stage Chicago tech companies like G2 and Sprout Social and Spot Hero and ShipBob and all these other folks. And we would just come together every month and be like, hey, what are you working on? What are you struggling with? And we support each other, help each other out. And after doing that for a couple of years, we wake up one day and we're impacted by a riff at our organization. So we both found ourselves pretty quickly without jobs. And, we had to come to a decision. We're like, okay, well, do we go get W-2 roles? Or it's like, man, we have this collective going every month, different leaders at different companies selling different products to different people, but they're always complaining about the exact same shit. Why don't we see if we can start offering solutions to some of these things that they keep complaining about? That eventually became what Sales Assembly is today. We started as a much more Chicago focused community for revenue leaders. And then after doing that for about 6, 7, 8 months, we started getting questions like, hey, crap, my BDRs are terrible at objection handling. I wish someone could provide them training for that. Or it's like, okay, well, why don't we put some together? Then a few months after that, it's like, hey, it'd be great if my AEs were getting better at negotiation too. It's like, okay, why don't you put together some courses on that? And on and on and on, just reacting to this feedback from the market, we started building out more and more training for the go-to-market teams of these tech companies. And then you fast forward 8 years, and what we are providing that ongoing training day to day for the go-to-market teams of, as of today, a few hundred B2B tech companies.
Interesting. So in regards to you see a lot of businesses, you guys work with a lot. You have the front row seat. What what are what are companies really dealing with today? What are some of the most common challenges you're seeing right now in organizations? And it doesn't have to be why they come to you,
Mhm.
but what are you seeing companies struggling with today?
It's um, it's probably a cliche answer by now, but it's all AI, right? I mean, it is, what do I do with AI? How do I build it into the organization? How do I balance the efficiency that AI brings with headcount? How do I allocate resources? How do I plan to continue to allocate resources with this overlay of we're living in this environment where July looks wildly different than May as far as the capabilities of AI. And July is going to look wildly different than October does a few months from now as far as the capabilities of AI are concerned. So just the pace of change related to all things AI and how that impacts businesses, how that impacts internally, again, headcount staffing needs, how that impacts client relations, client support, client interactions, how that impacts prospecting. That is what every single company, regardless of size, regardless of industry, regardless of product, that is the topic number one, two, and three that they're most concerned about.
Are they seeing that because of the macro? I mean, is it a macro demand or is it a internal micro demand? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the answer is yes. It's both. They are, and again, depending on the business, there is the outstanding question of like, okay, well, how is AI going to impact, how is it going to impact our TAM, right? How is it going to impact how we go to market? Is it going to expand or shrink the size of opportunity that we have available? But then internally, yeah, it is about how do we integrate in AI into more and more components of our business to make ourselves more efficient. And in doing so, do we need all the people that we have on the team right now? Those 10 job recs that we have open, do we only need eight of them? Do we only need seven? If we decide we only need seven, like, okay, well, how are these new AI tools going to fill the gap of those other three headcount that we're not going to hire? And like, how do we build those into our workflows? And how do we make sure that the technology that we choose to bring on board to fill that gap of three people right now is the right technology? How do we ensure it's going to continue to be the right technology 6 months from now, or something better, faster, cheaper going to come out? That's what, again, and it sounds like a lot because it is, but that's what they're all thinking about right now.
And where do you think the biggest driver in AI will be specifically around your space? And correct me if I'm wrong, you guys had started kind of operating in that sales motion, right?
Yeah.
That hey, how do we educate and inform sales teams a little bit more? Where do you think that AI is going to play its first? I mean, I think we're already seeing it with automations and so forth, with scoring and SDR and Salesforce coming out with things. But what are some of the ways that you guys are thinking about it when you're coming into your training and when you're looking at those people going, hey, they are looking to reduce their staff from a AE count?
Yeah, it's interesting because and that's part of the balance that a lot of these leaders are trying to strike. They're solving for what AI could do today without ignoring what we collectively are fully confident that AI might be able to do 6 months from now, right? So, for example, in the short term, when you look at the AI impact on a go-to-market function today, what can AI deliver that is useful, that it could deliver well and consistently? Call summaries, action items, deal inspection, assessing risk within a pipeline. Um, what can it not do? It cannot create fully autonomous reps, right? The fully autonomous AI SDR, that does not work yet, right? Or at least it doesn't work at scale. It cannot create, confident forecasts driven solely by stage progression. There are no one size fits all AI co-pilots, right? That's not that an organization like, great, we have this and now we're done. But at the same time, again, we could all look at the pace of change just over the past few quarters. Like, okay, well, it can't be long until there are fully autonomous, SDRs that are, that are good and that, get that get the job done, so to speak. It can't be long until AI, a single AI tool is going to be able to take away all the confusion around our forecasts and our forecasting capabilities. But it's not here yet, right? So again, it is this constant push and pull between, okay, we need to start integrating AI into more and more of how we do business. We need to build it into our workflows. But if we make the wrong choices, if we're too early, then we're going to end up ripping those products out, changing those workflows, which is going to be a huge pain in the ass. But if we're too late, we run the risk of all of our competitors having done this right and being first, becoming much more efficient, effective at all assets of their business before we did. And that's a risk that, that they aren't too excited about taking as well.
Yeah, let's go down that path a little bit because I am curious. You said, maybe there will be some point where there is an autonomous type SDR or AE. Just for fun, I mean, what does that look like? How does that sales cycle look? When we look at it today, right? You get a lead coming in, and I think you all talk about it from our standpoint. We get a lead coming in, it gets enriched. That enrichment creates a score. That
Yeah.
score then determines if you're qualified SQL, are you a qualified MQL, or should you just belong in a nurture campaign? Great, stop. AEs jump in or the SDRs jump in, they do their demo qualification and so forth. If we do look to this from an automation standpoint, what does the client or the prospect actually start to talk to, or do they? Is this a completely different side of deal making that's going to happen? I know this is very forward thinking, but have you thought about this? Have you guys thought about what that looks like for your business in particular? Because it's so people oriented.
Yeah, we do think about it all the time, and I'll plant my stake in the ground. I can't imagine for foreseeable future that AI will be able to replace AEs, right? The actual set, like someone hopping on the phone and building a relationship. I don't think that is able to be automated, but more importantly, I don't think that most buyers want that. I think that even with, again, over the past 10 years, and I'm sure you've seen this in your business, I mean, we all know that buyers, they're doing more and more research on their own, that they're coming to a conversation with a sales rep much more educated and much more further along in their own buying process than they were before, right? But there still is that last, call it 10-yard gap between where you meet the prospect and the actual buying decision. I think that there's always going to be a place for humans there, right? So unpacking, what you asked a little bit, like, okay, what does that mean as far as like AI in the sales process? Going back to the example that you laid out before, right now leads are coming in, they're being, enriched and scored, and it's like right now they're assigned to these cadences. AI, why not just have AI, put together the very thoughtful, bespoke language and then fire off those cadences without any rep going through HubSpot and clicking tasks, right? Just completely automate all that. That to an extent, I think is pretty much here, or if it's not here today, it will be, sometime in 2025. But then at the same time, once every company adopts this type of, automation from an SDR perspective, that makes the human interaction when they finally get to speaking with an account executive so much more important, because that's going to be the big differentiator, right? Is, you can't automate trust. AI cannot build trust. AI is going to be able to provide prospects with the potential buyers with much more information, with much more credibility around your product and how your product sits in the market compared to any competitors. but it's not going to be able to provide them the real world view of like, okay, what's it going to be like working with Ambassador, right? Who are the people there, right? Why should I choose them versus XYZ other competitor in the space? That is going to be the moat that is always going to exist for human reps. That's just my personal opinion. And we do see a lot of the companies that we work with buying into that philosophy as well, which is why they're placing such a heavy emphasis on training their reps to get out there in person, to do more in-person meetings, to break out from behind the screen, get better at things like storytelling and value articulation, just again, become a much more credible and thoughtful and trustworthy individual and build stronger relationships with prospects and clients, because that's going to end up making a big difference when every email that you get is super personalized, super relevant, super research, and all generated by AI. Again, the big differentiator is going to be like, okay, well, when I hop on the phone with Geoff, like, what is that conversation like? Do I like dealing with him or do I not?
But does that personalization, because I'll challenge you here on that a little bit, you know, with the information that's available today, right? I mean, I can go to ChatGPT, I can go to Google, I can go to a million different places and type it in and find the best vendor for whatever I'm buying, right? And I can train it to be like me, and I really can get most of the way through the sales cycle, I believe, except for maybe a product demo. And I just wonder, does it ever happen though where people who have to make decisions really quickly have to make decisions and they're like, okay, let's just execute? Or are we always going to be stopped by the procurement data infrastructure of large enterprise because they're having to always look at the next laws or the next rules and that. And so really it is going to be that personal element that's going to be important, but maybe it's not so much around the why are you buying this and everything. It's going to be the salesperson may morph into here's the demo and then I'll work with you on the procurement. So the salesperson starts to change. So maybe I'm kind of bringing my way back around to what you're saying. Does the sales position start to morph? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense, and it's very fair pushback. I could see a world where that happens. I mean, I will say that even to your point tactically on the demo. I mean, yeah, you could tools like Walnut right now could create personalized demos, and you could do that at scale. So it's like, no, I don't even have to hop on the phone with Geoff to do demo. I'll just do a demo on my own time. Um, but yeah, I do. I like your point about how the structure, the roles and responsibilities of an AE might evolve. What I would come back to is, and again, I might be wrong on this. If you're buying a $1,000 product, $5,000 product, $10,000 product, like sure, maybe end to end, you're just going to do async online, never talk to a human. 75, 100, $500,000. I would think that again, at least for the foreseeable future, individual buyers with the amount of responsibility and accountability that they have for their spend, they're not going to want to make $100,000 purchase without building a relationship with someone like you and having someone like Geoff help them navigate like, okay, well, yeah, here's what integration looks like. And sure, we're going to take care of these sort of procurement, P's and Q's to your point before. That's going to be the role of a sales professional. But again, full transparency, I might be wrong on that because people buy $80,000 cars off CarMax all the
Yeah,
time,
fair point.
right?
Yeah, fair point.
And that's a great, 7 days, bring it back. Some if you don't like something, maybe that there is an environment that looks similar to CarMax. Again, I can't really articulate what that would look like today, but I wouldn't be surprised if you fast forward, 5 years, 10 years, like yeah, people are buying, 500,000 that they're making $500,000 purchasing decisions for software using the CarMax model where it's like, hey, I mean, if we get, a month in or something like that, and like, oh, shit's breaking, and it's not what we, really thought, even though we did all the demos and this and that, yeah, we could find some sort of resolution and pivot away from that. Who knows?
Yeah. And I think staying on that side of the seller, I am curious your thoughts because if if AI, and I'll paraphrase here, if we feel that AI is going to change the seller and what they maybe should be focused on or how they're selling in a way, um, that means that I believe the relationship is going to have to build faster and quicker.
Yeah,
And I do think that people are going online a lot quicker to look at who I'm buying from, not just the company,
yeah,
but the seller itself. And I know myself, having built my own personal brand, and now I'm building my personal brand with Ambassador as well. So I have mine with my Fight to the Finish podcast, which is around this type of conversation. How do I overcome feats and so forth? But what I'm finding is I'm now starting to do my personal brand with Ambassador. And my question to you, when you start talking to companies, do we almost need to see, micro brands within a brand of the salesperson? Because that prospect on the other end is really going to be buying from you, and the content that's available now can be just so much quicker. Are you seeing any of that? Is there any kind of tailwind behind that type of thought process yet, or is it still no? They're just salespeople, and who you get is who you get.
no, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way before, but my gut tells me that you're right. And I live and operate within this very niche ecosystem of B2B tech sales. And on LinkedIn, there are, tech sales, quote unquote influencers, which to your point are just reps, right? That they're amazing reps that have built, great personal brands. I know many of them. And I do know for a fact that they do attribute a good amount of their success, whether they're especially in competitive deals, to the strength of their, in air quotes, brand, their personal brand. So I do think that there's a lot of validity to that. And yeah, I mean, to the point that you made at the very beginning of that thesis, someone could go to ChatGPT right now and say like, hey, tell me about sales assembly. How do I know that they're not going on there and saying like, well, tell me about this guy Matt Green
Yeah.
too? I would, I know that many of them are looking me up on LinkedIn. Why would they, if they're not already, why would they not just go to ChatGPT or Perplexity or Anthropic and say like, hey, I'm dealing with this guy Matt. Is he trustworthy? What do you think? Um, yeah, I never thought of it that way. I don't see a world where that doesn't start happening more often than it is right now.
But does that mean then that content you're creating as a salesperson, as a customer success rep, as a marketer? I mean, we see it a lot with the marketing. But as a sales rep, you see the influencers, but maybe it is important. And I'm kind of coming to this conclusion too, where I'm going, man, maybe I need to have my sales guys putting out their own content about themselves and who they are as individuals, because it's a lot. You can get content very quickly right now on an individual, and that's who you're dealing with. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I have a very biased viewpoint on this because I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. That has always been our biggest marketing channel, and I hear directly from prospects that my presence, and again, in air quotes, on LinkedIn has made a difference. It's either made a difference in them reaching out to me in general. It's made a difference in them choosing us over competitors. So I do know that again, small sample size of one in the soup, or I'm sorry, in the lake that I swim in, that is true, that is happening right now, and it is valuable. It has provided tangible inherent value to us here at Sales Assembly. And going back to my point before, I could point to reps at Gong or Sixth Sense or some of these other really big organizations where they would attribute a lot of their success to the personal brand that they built on LinkedIn. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that would be an unreasonable request or at least point of encouragement for you and your reps saying like, yeah, why don't you just get out there more? What is the harm about building a positive brand name for yourself, even if only 1 in 100 prospects actually investigates it, could make the difference between, having a good year and a not so good year.
Yeah. What are the three things that you do on LinkedIn? I mean, you just made me think of that. What are the three things that you would recommend anybody do on LinkedIn? I think people are really trying things out on there right now, and some are real swing hitting hits,
Yeah.
but some are big misses. And you're like, you're bringing Instagram on here, and it's not working.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna. You asked me for three things. Number one, two, and three provide value, and that's it. I mean,
How do you
yeah,
do that though? Give an example. Like,
yeah. I mean, sharing. I'll share what I like to do that
yeah,
I think is valuable, and people have told me is valuable. I will. So, for instance, just over the past week, I've shared comp plan design ideas. I've shared, like, hey, if you are creating new territories, here's an equation to use to think about how to go about segmenting and assigning territories. When you're coming up with new quota plans for your reps, here's a model to think through, like, okay, well, here's how to allocate quota increases appropriately across the team where performance is unequal, right? As you can imagine, given the business that we're in, training salespeople, like, hey, here's, a list of, 10 really amazing questions that you should start asking on discovery calls that, might seem a little bit like, oh, wow, off the wall and aggressive, but they get to the answers that a sales rep wants to hear, stuff like that. And I can't stand the, hey, comment here and I'll send it to you, or DM me and all. It was like, no, just share it, right? Just be helpful. If you as an individual are helpful, then they will start in the implication, okay, well, Ambassador is probably a helpful organization too, because man, they got these 2 or 3 people from Ambassador. They're just being helpful all day long, providing really cool and compelling data that, like, oh yeah, it's useful. Ambassador must be a great organization. They might not think that consciously, but subconsciously they will. And when it comes time to choose between you and a competitor, again, consciously or subconsciously, they'll just be like, God, those ambassador guys, that they're A, so helpful, and B, they seem to really know what they're talking about, right? I'm going to trust them versus their competitor in the space.
I like that. Um, well, some of the time we have, I want to switch gears a little bit because there is the conversation that I'm having not only internally but with peers of mine as well. And that's specifically around companies' SaaS price points. And I have a theory, and I'd like to share it with you, and I'd like to hear your thoughts because you work with a lot of different companies. I have a theory that with AI, with the automation of certain things, there is a continued expectation of prospects and so forth that I'm going to use this very uh, far fetched thing in terms of relating it to SaaS. But if a car can drive itself, why can't SaaS be more automated? If I pay $60,000 for a car that drives itself, why am I paying $500,000 for a CRM system? Right. And there's a part of me that feels like companies are coming around to this and they're going, wait a second, this shouldn't be this expensive. With all the AI tools out there today, why don't I just try and build this myself? Right. So that's where I'm going with this question. But I think twofold with that, I am seeing a lot of AI companies that are charging the 250 to 500,000 because they're going after the people line item and
Mm-hmm.
not the tech line item, right? If I can reduce X amount of people for your company, would you be willing to pay Y? But I think a lot of those companies are going through their first year cycle.
Yeah.
And what I start to question is after that first year, you get that client to pay 250, 500,000, $1 million for it. But does that client go, well, that was great. You gave me 12 months of education. I'm now going to go build it myself. or the price needs to come down to something that's a little more comparable. So I tell that story because I'm curious how many of your companies that you work with are actually having this forcing function, and so the automation is actually have let's keep the gross margin where it's at, and in order to do that, because the price point's coming down because it's being requested, and so the AI, all these things are almost automating what was people so that I can keep my gross margins. And I know that's loaded, so take it from whatever direction you want, but I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It lends to the B2C-ization that we're seeing of B2B, right? Where you talked about it at the top, the expectations that prospects have, right? Pardon the analogy, but 10 years ago, it's like, no, we go to Jewel, we go to Whole Foods, we buy groceries, we come home, we look up recipes, we cook the food, then we eat it. And it's like, no, no, we get the meal kit delivered, right? And it's like, okay, well, yeah, the meal kit is in the recipe, but all the ingredients are there. And then it's like, well, no, we just get the meal delivered, right? At better, faster, cheaper prices than anything else. So when you extrapolate that across our day-to-day living, right? Any B2C interaction that we have, it's natural for prospects to start having those expectations of a B2B product. It's like, why can I not have this cheaper? To your point, why can I not have it faster? And why do I need it forever? Right? I only want to order meals, from DoorDash or Uber Eats occasionally, right? I don't need it every day. So I do think that, again, consciously or subconsciously, that is leading to a change in expectations, right? Um, but answering your question more directly, where what we see a lot of companies getting ready for, it's it's less about like, okay, well, are we too expensive? And it's more about how do we, is there a way for us to start charging for outcomes rather than for products? Because that's what individual buyers like you and I, that's what we're going to start expecting. We don't want to pay for a marketing automation platform, right? We want to pay we want to pay for open rates and click throughs, right? We don't want to pay for for an AI or for an AI SDR platform. We want to pay for booked meetings, qualified booked meetings. That's where I think more and more buyers are going to be. That's what more and more buyers are going to look for. They're going to look, well, hey, I mean, I don't want to make an investment in the CRM just to make an investment in the CRM. I want to pay for some type of outcome. And I think that more and more companies are trying to look at this through this lens of like, okay, well, how do we make sure that we are able to not only sell on outcomes, but maybe get to a point where we're able to charge for outcomes rather than charging for a service. I think that's like the shining city on the hill that a lot of companies are trying to solve for, that they're trying to get to, because they know that's where the buyers are going to be looking, and they know that their go-to-market motion is going to be that much easier if they get to an environment where they're able to charge buyers like Geoff for outcomes as opposed to products.
It makes sense. I just wonder how easy that is for vendors, because
Yeah.
that correlation between the two. I know, remember we used to do that in the Google ad days, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to pay for the views, right? It was the views. Then it was, I want the clicks. Then it was, no, I want the action. And then, well, but if you don't connect this system to this system, how do we know that there's an action? And so you start to begin this fight with the prospect or with the client that you have, and so it becomes kind of this battle between the two. Um, so I really am curious to see where it goes. I want to hit on that. I really liked what you said, which was the B to Cization. I I I never have heard that before, but there is a clear bleeding that's happening between, as a consumer, I'm expecting my consumer brands, Amazon, all of these, I want it I want a selection. I want
Yeah.
it now. I want it cheaper, and it better be delivered yesterday,
Yeah.
right? Is that what you're saying, that that clear expectation is starting to move into almost this B2B side? And so is this where it's going to start to take on its own initiative? Because I'll tell you, Klaviyo, kudos to Klaviyo for what they've done.
Yeah.
Sign up, $25 a month, get started,
Yeah.
right? And then they go, great, I've got you. Now I'm going to start engaging. I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but it looks like they're now coming out with a CRM system. And
I
I'm
didn't see
going,
that. Yeah.
like, holy crap, these guys are going, get you in for $25 a month, and then I'm going to start throwing all this other stuff. And honestly, that's what Ambassador's trying to do right now, is get you in for referral, but there's loyalty reviews, surveys, hero, there's all this stuff. And then we're building this automation in it that where they really, I mean, they don't need a person doing it anymore. The
Yeah.
bot just does it all for them. So touch on that B to Citization, if that's the word. I think that was the
Yeah.
word you used, but talk about that a little bit more and how brands can start to see if that shift is happening in their sales org. What are some of the traits that you see?
Yeah, it's so I do think it's happening. I think that initially with a lot of brands, with a lot of companies, unfortunately, it shows up as churn, right? It shows up because of this set of mismanaged expectations. I mean, think about it. When literally, I don't know how many decisions you and I make on any given day, but how many times do you go on Amazon or pull up Uber or Lyft? But when we are just surrounded by nothing but convenience and customer centricity and same day delivery and all that good stuff, it's unnatural for us to not start expecting that from our B2B vendors. Everything down, it starts with customer service and response time, right? Well, what do you mean? I mean, you can't, help me launch this or help me with this quick integration. I mean, it's only going to take a few minutes of your time. I mean, I just need, someone on the phone to do it. I mean, why should I have to pay a higher tier, right, to do this? So I think that initially, if companies are starting to fail at this, it is going to show up as churn, right? It's going to be the lagging indicator, and it is going to be around the customer service, customer support. Um, from there, I do think that again goes back to, and I think that you could see this with some B2B brands right now, how they start communicating with buyers. I mean, why do you think that, a platform like Instagram is doing so well for B2B vendors, right? Why would a company like Salesforce? It's like, yeah, let's, pour a lot of money into advertising on Instagram. Why? I mean, because they're selling to people, and people have certain expectations. They're used to doing certain things, right? So yeah, sorry, long-winded way to answer your question. It's going to start up in churn. It's going to revolve primarily around the interaction. Going back to our point at the top of this call, interaction from a customer and partner perspective, right? What is it like dealing with Geoff at Ambassador? What is it like dealing with the team at Ambassador, right? Are they meeting the expectations, the really high expectations that I have set now intrinsically because of all the other interactions that I have with the Amazons throughout the course of any given day? Bringing this full circle to something you said about 5 minutes ago, it's going to be tough for vendors. Yeah, it is. Doesn't mean that buyers aren't going to expect it, right? I mean, no one said that this was easy.
It really makes you pause for a moment, because it goes back to what you and I were chat. I mean, just even the comment I made earlier about the salespeople having their own brands.
Yeah,
I mean, if we really do think, and to your point, I think it's an amazing theory that B to Cization moving into B2B, well, it really is the reason why consumers demand it. And it was a thesis that the reason why I started my career was I believed consumers were
yeah,
choosing the brands the same way that they chose their friends. And
yeah,
my goal was to always build technologies around that. So going from the consumer side, not from the brand side. And that's really where Ambassador and anything that you look in my career, I've built technology specifically around that. And I pause for a moment, because I'm like, wow, maybe what AI is really doing is it's driving a level of personalization and expectation that we maybe didn't have before, where you kind of could be hidden behind this brand almost as a salesperson, as a marketer, as a customer success rep. But now it's kind of being pulled from, being pulled out, where it is that relationship that you're building with the person on the other end of the call.
Yeah, I mean, and just to drive that point home, giving a real world example, we use a tool here where I could take, a list of prospects that, that I've never spoken to before, upload it to this AI agent. The agent will do a whole lot of research, and, like you said before, it'll score the leads. It'll do a whole lot of research on not only the individual and the company, overlay that research with what Sales Assembly does, our value proposition, and spit out messaging that is, 90% of the way there of being ready to just cut and paste. And if I sent that to you and you're a prospect, you'd read it, you're like, oh shit, Matt did a hell of a lot of, like, this is really thoughtful. Matt did a lot of research. But here's the thing, when everyone has that, right? When all of your emails look like that, and this is where the sales rep comes in, when, it's going to be no different than 5 years ago when everyone was just click and play on Outreach or SalesLoft. Right. And when everyone's getting hit with, 10-step sequence, just fast forward a year from now, when everyone has, these hyper personalized, hyper relevant emails landing in their inbox, what is going to be the differentiator? It's when they hop on the phone with you and they have a conversation with Geoff, right? Not with Ambassador.
Wow. I think that's a really good anchor point to kind of, put a pin in it. I could have this conversation for a whole nother hour.
Yeah.
This is very good. Typically the last thing that I do is I really like to ask the person I'm interviewing. We have a lot of different listeners, whether they're athletes all the way through to CEOs, salespeople, and so forth, who listen to this podcast. And, I'm just curious if you could leave them with, one thought of wisdom, one thing to be thoughtful about for their career, personal life, whatever it might be. What's the one thing that you could leave them?
This, like a lot of my other good ideas, is not mine, blatantly stolen. I stole this from, I heard Scott Galloway say it a few years ago. And I loved it. I remember it all the time. Nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. In life and business, helps keep you grounded, right? Things going really well here at Sales Assembly. It's like not as good as it seems, right? 2023 tech recession, like crap, things are, pretty shitty here at Sales Assembly. It's not as bad as it seems, right? Just keeping that level of equilibrium in everything, whether it's, again, professional life or personal, that's always been a really good anchor for me.
I think that's a good way to end it. This has been really insightful, Matt. You've answered a lot of really good questions here. And I think you've given our listeners some really solid thoughts around how they can be looking at their business maybe in a different light, or maybe keep going in the direction that they are because they're thinking about it right. But I do think we're going through a huge transformational shift, not just because of AI. I think it's just the whole entire ecosystem of how we do business is completely transforming.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, this was a great conversation, and I fully agree with that last point. AI is very much like COVID. All it did is just hit the fast forward button on some things. But yeah, we were going in this direction anyway.
I like that. I like that. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
This is my time.